Thank you for coming tonight. I am Bruce Jones, candidate for District 2 Supervisor. I'm not a career politician. I'm a retired physician that specialized in orthopedic surgery. However, my experience has suited me well for being an effective supervisor on day one. I served more than 3 years on the Templeton Area Advisory Group, 2 years as its chairman. This is an elected board that represents a 58 square mile area surrounding Templeton. On that board, I got a chance to ask people, talk to homeowners, ranchers, farmers, business owners, land use applicants, their neighbors. And I do understand what matters to people, and I want to represent these neighbors that I met on the TAG board. Also, I have experience being on a nonprofit hospital board. I was on that board because I was elected to be the president of the medical staff. And that placed me on the board of directors of the hospital. This hospital had more employees and a larger budget than our county government. We had to make difficult decisions. Nonprofit hospitals don't really have to make a profit, but they can't go broke and stay in existence. So we had to be careful about our budget, but we had to also try to provide the best service for the community, exactly what a county government should do. As a physician on the Board of Supervisors, I will bring some special strength. During the pandemic, the board relinquished their oversight authority to the health department officials, and they could make decisions without oversight. Now that that authority has been returned to the board can and should exercise oversight authority. My knowledge and expertise will make that more possible. I worked very hard as a surgeon, more than 60 hours a week, and I'm willing to work just as hard for you. My door will be open. I want to hear from you, and I will try very hard to represent the citizens of this county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burchett, and thank the Farm Bureau for putting this event on this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon as the 5th generation of my family to have farmed in California. And as I was doing the math today, a member of the Farm Bureau for now over 30 years here in this county, which is a small fraction of its 100-year history. You know, it's an understatement to say that we're living challenging times right now. We're beset by a number of problems, social, homelessness. Our water supply is in deep trouble in a lot of places. The cost of housing is extremely high, and it's affecting our economy. And those problems all visit on agriculture, and agriculture suffers from more challenges as well. The overall increase in the amount of regulation. The water supply, of course, is directly affecting ag's ability to do what it is there to do. Labor relations have been changed as the state legislature puts in new requirements there. And the overall cost of doing business is rising. You know, the Board of Supervisors should be helping with all of these issues, and we're going to talk about some of the specifics there. But with the current majority controlling the Board of Supervisors, it's not always the case that our board has been helpful to agriculture. In fact, it's been detrimental in quite a number of ways. And we can talk about some ill-considered efforts. The planting ordinance is one of them, and I'm sure we're going to get asked about that. The failure of leadership on stabilizing the water supplies, particularly in the Paso Robles groundwater basin. And the overall refusal to embrace a modern approach to energy, particularly electricity, is costing agriculture. So these forums are great. This is a chance for you all to see directly the differences between two candidates, the differences in our priorities, the difference in our knowledge of county government. And I would have to say that Dr. Jones, MD, is no more relevant to his assessment of public health issues than my PhD in geophysics is. the requirement to be specially trained is one thing that's extremely important. But the role of a county supervisor is different, and that is to make public policy. And that depends on knowledge of county government, an understanding of county government, the relationships that one builds as one is involved in county government, and the requirement to have a sense of fiscal responsibility. I bring all of this to the table. I look forward to discussing a lot of the issues that affect agriculture, and look forward to your questions, sir. Well, that's a problem that we are working on. The first and foremost right now in front of us is a staffing problem, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic. We have suffered with the great resignation, and we have a very high vacancy rate. So our ability to move things through our permit process has been compromised. We're working on that. We're implementing new software that's going to help that, although there's going to be a learning curve on that. The matter of regulation is always on our mind, and I would say that we've actually had some success moving forward. For instance, we've streamlined and expanded the ability to put farm worker housing on our ag properties. A few years back, we revised our grading ordinance and brought the Resource Conservation District into the process with their specific expertise that's relevant to agriculture. There's still work to be done. And one of the things that I'm very proud of in my office is providing help in communicating with the complexities of land use. I've been doing land use in this county for over 25 years, approaching 30 now. And oftentimes the frustrations with the permit process are a matter of communication, understanding exactly what is needed, when it's needed, and when easier options exist to getting the job done. So it's a full court press. We always are trying to improve our permitting process, and as I think we train up staff and recruit and retain the best, we should be able to improve this going forward.
Yeah, this is an issue that I care greatly about. I served on the Templeton Advisory Group, as I said earlier. We would see applications that we're told are coming up, and then would be a couple years later until it actually came up for our review. The system is slow and meticulous and expensive. What we need is a faster, better, cheaper system. If you look at the average cost of, say, a single dwelling in terms of government cost, if a $700,000 house costs you $70,000 in permits and fees with the planning department, there's something terribly wrong. Our process is too slow. The person who wants to put up a shed on their property often waits a very long time to be approved. One of the problems is applicants find it necessary to hire expensive planning agents to navigate their projects through the system. This shouldn't have to be the case. Everybody should be treated the same and not have to have an advocate get them through the system. Thank you.
Well, a lot of the frustration with the land use permitting process resides. It really is proportional to the complexity of the process, and one of the real sticking points on larger projects has been the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And that's a mandate that the county has to fulfill proper environmental analysis. Whether you like it or not, that's part of the landscape of doing business. Again, success in that depends on a good understanding of our land use ordinance and what the requirements of CEQA are. And granted, those things are complicated. But doing it right saves time. And it also prevents projects from ending up being subject to litigation, which is all too easy under CEQA. And CEQA reform is something that supervisors all over the state would like to see happen. It needs to be reformed, and the process of getting that reform is one of our legislature. On the other side, simple things like sheds shouldn't take a long time. And, you know, Mr. Jones may assert that it does, but I'd like to see some specifics. I've been a farmer. I farmed for 25 years, and doing things, especially outside the coastal zone, is really pretty straightforward. They are what are called ministerial permits. That is, if you meet the requirements of our land use ordinance in terms of setbacks and heights and square footages and things like that, many agricultural structures, in fact, do not require a formal permit, simply an indication of what you're going to do and where you're going to do it. Again, understanding what needs face a particular applicant is a matter of education, and my office on a regular basis helps folks navigate that system.
Dr. Jones, opportunity for a vote.
I think we need a system that doesn't need a supervisor helping you through the system. Some of you in the room understand that I paid my way through college and medical school doing carpentry. I do understand about building. I do understand places in this country where permits are processed very quickly. We need to have a set of plans for homes that start out at 1,000 square feet. If you build this home, if you follow these plans, you bypass many of the planning rules. Have another one for 1,200 and 1,400 and 1,600, so that basic homes could be built without putting them through this huge burden of $50,000 or $70,000 worth of fees. We have a housing problem that in part is caused by our policies. Well, irrigated crops are a huge part of our economy, and we have to be helpful. What we need to do is increase the supply of water, and we can do that. One of the things we can do is to develop new sources of water. For instance, we're not utilizing treated wastewater fully. In the state of California, we actually dump twice as much treated wastewater into the ocean than we reuse that could be easily used in agriculture. Also, we need to ramp up desalinization. Diablo Canyon is the ideal place to have a large-scale desal facility. In that facility, the MIT Stanford study showed that you could produce a cubic meter of water, 264 gallons for less than $1. That's about $1,000 an acre foot. Also, we need to increase storage of water. We can do that by building retention basins, so when we do have flooding, water is trapped and can percolate into our aquifers. We need to repair dams that can store water. An example of this would be to repair the dam for the Santa Margarita Reservoir. This dam is pre-World War II. It's not up to standards for today. There's state money, about $100 million money that's set aside for repairing these dams. We need to ask for that money and rebuild this dam so it can store more water. We also can reduce water demand. One way to reduce water demand in residential and commercial is to require that we use drought-resistant irrigation. Thank you.
So last I recall, the total economic impact of agriculture in San Luis Obispo County was somewhere over $1 billion. And the most recent crop report came before the board not long ago, and as I recall, there are hundreds of millions of dollars of of gross receipts coming to growers from crops like wine grapes. Broccoli is up there at number 4. Strawberries are number 1. So irrigated agriculture is a huge contributor to the San Luis Obispo County economy and to its lifestyle, which affects other parts of the economy, such as our visitor serving businesses. The question you asked specifically was, would I support using taxpayer dollars to fund increases in the water supply? And the answer is yes, with a very specific condition on that. We have an entity called the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, governed by the same 5 supervisors that sit on the board. But its job is specific to understanding and planning and implementing the improvements to the water situation within San Luis Obispo County, whether it's stormwater or whether it's irrigated agriculture. And it's real important to understand how that splits out. The general taxpayer dollars are rightfully spent analyzing the water situation throughout San Luis Obispo County, identifying issues and analyzing them. And that was the case, for instance, in the Paso Robles groundwater basin, where the dramatic decline that continues. The solutions to that, the increases in supply, the efforts at conservation, are rightfully paid for by those individuals who benefit from those projects. And that's really an incredibly important part of the overall effort that I'll talk about in the second segment here.
Rebuttal opportunity, Dr. Jones?
I will use that additional time to finish what I was saying in my first part. My next thing that I wanted to talk about was water savings, decrease in demand with agriculture. We need to support with technological help and other measures so that we can move to high-tech irrigation. If you use high-tech irrigation with the help of computers, moisture sensors in the ground, weather stations that measure temperature and wind, you can reduce water consumption by about 20% with the same good results with your crops. This has been shown in grapes and other commodities, and I think that as a county, we need to support that because 20% less use in agriculture would solve a lot of our problems with our basin, and that's good for everybody, not just people in agriculture, and as a community, we need to support that. Also, there was a study recently reported about the retention basins, and it was a nice study and no one did anything with the data. We need to actually use the data to make a difference. Thank you.
So let me talk about beneficiaries paying for projects, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's really needed here. We have 2 great examples in this county that are having profound effects on our water supply. One of them is the Los Osos wastewater treatment plant. After 35 years of controversy, that landed on my desk the first day I was in office, and after a long and arduous process, we have that connected, and it's making a difference in Los Osos. We're seeing well levels rise even as we've gone through one of the most serious droughts that we know about. The other is the Nacimiento pipeline that brings water that was due the county for decades until it was finally constructed recently to a variety of jurisdictions. Again, both those projects were paid for by the individuals and the agencies that benefit from the increase in its supply. Dr. Jones goes on about a number of technical solutions, which are all well and good. But the real issue in front of us is the question of political will, because what we're talking about is a scarce resource that's being fought over. And the failure of leadership of the current board majority, with which Dr. Jones is closely aligned, is the real problem here. So going forward in solving issues in the Paso Robles groundwater basin, in the Edna Valley, which we're looking at down out the windows here, we really need to be able to have political leadership from a county supervisor to bring folks together, to have the hard conversations that are going to lead to the solutions that are needed here. That depends on experience, that depends on knowledge of county government, and that depends on relationships, both within the community and within different agencies and levels of government. That's what I've been doing for the nearly 16 years I've been in office, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that. Well, the problem with the Salinas Dam holds back Salinas Reservoir, or Santa Margarita Lake as it's more commonly known, is that it doesn't meet state seismic safety standards. And I've heard a number of numbers tossed around on it, but let's say that in round terms it's $50 million. Now we're not gonna grab 50 million of the 100 million that Dr. Jones talks about. So what we're gonna have to do is work with the federal government. And there's an opportunity here, because the Army Corps of Engineers really doesn't want to keep owning that dam. It's a relic from before World War II. So we have had it started back before 2010. I was in Washington talking to the Army Corps about the transfer of that dam. It's complicated. No one likes to hear that about government, but it is. But with the transfer needs to come money. So we're working with our congressional delegation, both Congress members and senators, to try to tee that up. The key is, if we can get control of the Salinas Dam with the County Flood Control District, we can start thinking about a really important project, which is to add floodgates to that dam that were originally designed into it, that would raise the level of that lake up 19 feet. I can't remember exactly how many 1,000-acre feet that amounts to in extra storage, but that's a huge improvement in our North County water supply. The complication at the local level is that the city of San Luis Obispo has the rights to the water coming out of the Salinas Reservoir right now. So once again, the matter of solving this problem depends on a knowledge of government at different levels, from the local to the state to the federal, and the ability to bring people together to negotiate a solution. And that would be high on my list as I head into my next term.
Dr. Jones?
It's high on my list too, and I've already talked some about this issue. The dam has significant problems. This $100 million I talked about is in fact designated for just that. We obviously won't get every dollar we need, but there are other sources. We need more storage of water. These are problems we have to solve. It cannot be continually put off till the next year. We have to get busy on this. And there's some resources that make it easier now to do than at times when we had more water. Now, state government's interested in helping with water issues.
Well, you know, this is really but one of a number of issues that we've got to figure out. And you know, I think a lot of it really is focused on what's going on in the Paso Robles groundwater basin. You know, we can talk about you know, increasing the supply of Santa Margarita Reservoir, the Salinas Reservoir, Santa Margarita Lake, but you know, the question now is, what are we going to do with it? Who's going to pay for it? How's it going to be deployed? How's it going to affect the water balance in the Paso Robles groundwater basin? And that is part of a much bigger effort that really should be focused around our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act efforts, our SIGMA as it's commonly known. There may yet be a question about that, but I'll tell you, in the Paso Basin, efforts have not proceeded as quickly as they should have. And that's, again, a political leadership void right there. The two current North County supervisors have simply not led on this issue. And as a new North County supervisor representing San Miguel, which is their CSD is one of the groundwater sustainability agencies, I look forward to working on that. We got a plan. Yes, it has a very weak implementation schedule. It has a very weak implementation vision and no schedule for actually doing anything specific. Paso Robles groundwater basin is absolutely crucial to our economy, to our ag economy, and to the economy of the county as a whole. So that's got to receive some attention. And you know, Santa Margarita Dam is one of maybe half a dozen different things that needs to be worked on, and it all has to fit together. So my experience in county government gives me a good overview of that. We're updating our master water report for the county, and that conversation will be front and center there.
Dr. Jones, another opportunity?
I believe also that water issues should be front and center. I think that the public has a will to move forward on things that before the drought they would have been less enthusiastic. Frankly, we haven't done well over the last 16 years in terms of our water planning, but we need to move forward, and I think the public will support us in doing that now, and there's many measures that can be done. For instance, we could have cities use their other sources of water first before they go to groundwater. So if you have nacimiento water, if you have river water, if you have recharge water from processed wastewater, we should ask and that these service districts use that water first and use groundwater only as a last resort. That would leave more water in the basin, because the people over the basin have only that water. They don't have these other sources. Thank you. In the Paso Basin, now there's much talk about the minimal users having up to 25 acre feet, and I would support that. I think that we do need to look at some of the very large water users and insist that they use good irrigation practices that could reduce their water consumption. There is technology, as I said earlier, that could be used to reduce water consumption on many of these crops, and I think that we should push very hard, particularly for the large users, to follow that technology and use it. If the large grape growers could reduce their water consumption by 20%, that would be enormous in terms of helping.
So, Mr. Burchett, the question you asked actually pertained not to the Paso Basin, as Mr. Jones answered, but to the Adelaida area, which is the area largely west of the 101, which has a number of outstanding wineries and a lot of irrigated, particularly grape growing, going on. We know there are some water challenges there. The county, you'd asked also what the county was going to do about it. Well, the county has commissioned a study, or the Flood Control District has commissioned a study with the U.S. Geologic Survey to analyze the water situation in that part of our county. That's going to be a much more, that's going to be a challenging project, partly because it hasn't been studied before, and partly because the geology in that part of the county is much more complicated than the large basin that the Paso Basin is. But the USGS is on it. They are in a first 2 or 3 phases of a 2-year program to get a basic understanding of the fractured bedrock water supply there. I think looking forward, we probably are looking overall at maybe 5 to 7 years that it's going to be required to gather the necessary information and get the technical basis. But we're going to have to make public policy on what information we have. And that's the real challenge of elected office, particularly in this era right now. So, I'm standing by, waiting for the first tranche of information to come out. Quite clearly, we're going to have to talk about what is fair use, because we have a number of competing interests there, from the wineries to the residences. And once we have a little bit of an understanding of the physical situation, we can start talking about what sorts of regulations we'd have to put in place. I'll talk a little bit in the second segment about a question of moratorium.
Dr. Jones, vote.
I'm not so inclined to be waiting and seeing for a few years. I also attended the information sessions on the geologic study. What we do know is that there are many small wells that are going dry in the Adelaide watershed, and there's concern that there are some very large quantity water users that may be drying out other people's wells. I think to hide our head in the sand for another few years is not the right attitude, and I think we do have enough evidence that wells are going dry.
So the difference, and this is a matter of experience with county government, we have to have facts upon which to make decisions. And it's not a matter of hiding our head in the sand to stand by and let the current system of resolving these competing interests in the Adelaida take its course. Dr. Jones may not appreciate is that there's California's case law that governs here. These are largely riparian rights of water that we're talking about. And there is a concept of interference, that if one user is unduly interfering with the ability of other users in the basin or in the area to draw water according to their riparian rights, that becomes a civil matter that goes to court. Now that's not an ideal solution in any way, shape, or form. So there is a reason for the county to move on this and try to exercise its land use authority to try to balance these competing interests. But we can't just go in there and do that. We have to make a fact-based decision. When we pass an ordinance, we have to make findings of fact. And again, with this board majority, it is a little bit of a crapshoot, frankly, as to whether the findings that are made are actually based on facts. So that's the fundamental importance of gathering some information, because anything the county might do to regulate would go down in flames in court if it doesn't have a solid factual basis. So, frustrating as it is, I understand that. We'd like to move quickly. We probably should have been studying this decades ago, but we didn't. And so we're going to do the best we can right now, and we are going to look forward to a fair allocation of that resource in that part of the county as we do everywhere in the county. For the Paso Robles groundwater basin, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, is absolutely the right process, the right project to manage the groundwater issues there. The planting ordinance that you referred to is one of the worst ideas that our board majority has put forward in my memory. Certainly in terms of resource management, it is an absolute disaster, and it has drawn severe criticism from your Farm Bureau, from the county's Agricultural Liaison Advisory Board, from the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance, and from farmers all over the Paso Basin, because it threatens to blow up a basin that is in serious crisis right now by allowing any parcel, no matter where it's located or what it's doing, to use perhaps as much as 25 acre-feet of water a year. And you think, well, is that a lot or is that a little? The challenge, the problem is that there are 4,800 parcels that would be eligible to claim that 25 acre-foot exemption. 96,000 acre-feet of water, of extra water draw on the Paso Basin, which is already overdrafted by at least 10, 12, 13,000 acre-feet a year, and whose safe yield is only 61,000 acre-feet. So this planting ordinance, which is headed toward our Planning Commission and eventually the Board of Supervisors, is a complete disaster. And again, this has been put forward by our board majority. A minute ago, you heard Mr. Jones indicate his support of that by endorsing the 25 acre-foot exemption. So this is something that I think Ag should be deeply concerned about.
It is correct that I support the 25 acre-foot exemption for parcels. Actually, it's sites rather than parcels. If there's a ownership of several parcels, it's still one site. I think that to have all the water rights go to a few people does not seem to be fair. And I think that there should be a minimal use ordinance, and I think 25 acre-feet is a reasonable choice. I said it earlier in this debate, and I stand by that.
So here's the problem with, more problems with the planting ordinance. Again, it's astounding to me that a basin that's already overdrafted would be subject to free use of water that could take it down to a nosedive, to a crash landing. As the environmental analysis of this conceived ordinance indicates, there's got to be mitigations for the many severe environmental impacts that have been identified there. And the mitigations come forth in the planting ordinance as further regulation on agriculture, setbacks from riparian areas, the requirements to monitor and adhere to air pollution control provisions that have never been imposed on agriculture. And if you really look at the commentary coming from ALAB and from the Farm Bureau and from the Wine Country Alliance, they see that effort to benefit a few friends of the board majority is backfiring into a massive overregulation of agriculture. That's absolutely unnecessary because, again, going back to the premise of the question, it was, is Sigma the right way to do this? And it absolutely is. We've got a plan moving forward that's going to confront the very clear fact that we have to do two things in the Paso Basin. One of them is increase supply, and the other is to reduce demand, reduce extractions. And the planning ordinance flies completely in the face of that. You know, I'm hopeful that somehow ag can make its voice known and fight this off, because it would be the death of a lot of small farmers in this county.
A little up to you, Dr. Jones?
I think that the 25 acre foot is the saving of many of the small farmers, not the death of small farmers. I think that if it's necessary to cut water use, we need to first look at water users that are large-scale water users. They need to be using the technology available, and they need to not be over-watering, which would greatly reduce our draw on the basin. As I mentioned earlier, with appropriate technology, you can cut water consumption on grapes by about 20%. If we insisted on people using high-tech watering systems, that people not overwater, I think we could go a long ways to solving our problems. I find it a little unfair that overliers of the aquifers were only allowed to have 5 acre feet, while others were allowed to have large quantities of water. Much of our revenue actually comes from state sources and federal sources, and we're the conduit. For instance, in mental health, the majority of the money does not come from the county, but comes from these outside sources, and we direct its use. I think that we have some control over certain taxes, such as sales tax. But much of our revenue is actually state and federal revenue, and we direct its use. I think we have to be judicious in how we direct these use. I mentioned mental health. We've done a not such a great job in mental health in this county. We don't have the hospital beds that we need for this, and yet we've received a lot of federal and state money. We have to look carefully at how we use money that comes to us, because most of our money actually doesn't originate from taxes within the county, but originates from taxes that are federal and state.
So, Dr. Jones is correct that a goodly chunk of the county budget does come from state and federal sources, but he doesn't understand that, in fact, those sources in particular, we do not have control over how they're used. They come from those higher levels of government with the specific requirement that we use them for specific actions. Health and social services are two of the biggest consumers of those funds. Those are not discretionary to the county. The revenue streams that are discretionary are property taxes, sales taxes, and our transient occupancy tax. The greatest piece of that is our property taxes, of which we only get about 23 or 24% of the whole property tax pie that's generated in the county. Over 60% goes to our school system, and that's again as a part of a state mandate. We get a piece of the sales tax, and we have some ability to raise sales taxes if we get a 2/3 vote of the voters in this county. So it's not a matter of whether the Board of Supervisors is going to raise sales tax or not. It's a matter of whether the voters want. And we had a measure on the ballot, you will remember, a couple of elections ago, Measure J, half-cent sales tax to fund transportation, $25 million a year, more or less, going to the county and the 7 cities, probably paid at least half by visitors to our county. Required a 2/3 vote, came 300 votes short. And, you know, that's the will of the voters, and that's where we got. Transient occupancy tax for the county is also one that would have to go to the ballot. Right now, it's low at 9%. Most cities are at least 10, and I think some are as high as 12, but it's not a huge source, maybe $12 million a year out of a $750 million budget.
Dr. Jones, your vote?
One thing that Mr. Gibson and I may differ on, he has consistently not supported Prop 13. Prop 13 is tax protections that have to do with your property taxes largely. I will support Prop 13. Without it, agriculture will suffer greatly, and the ability of generational farms to be passed down from one generation to another will be impacted. There needs to be changes in Prop 19 as well, modifications.
And, you know, it's interesting, and I've heard Dr. Jones say this on occasions, and it is absolutely false. I'd ask him for the receipts on that assertion that I've tried to diminish Prop 13. I have never done so. In fact, I don't think, you know, only having been in California for a short time, he may not realize that Prop 13 is actually part of our state constitution. And every supervisor, including me, takes an oath being sworn in each time we start a term to uphold the Constitution of the state of California and the federal Constitution as well. And that is exactly what I have done. I think what Dr. Jones also doesn't understand, again, because it's a California thing, Prop 13 was put in by voter initiative, and it can only be modified by voter initiative. So, in fact, I have no ability one way or the other to affect Prop 13. We deal with Prop 13 every day of our lives in government. And it is a constraint on county government. I completely support it. It has kept property taxes low. There are a number of consequences to that. And one of them is that government doesn't have as much revenue as it might want to be able to do other projects that the community would like. And so I'm often left in a position of explaining to my constituents why a road can't be paved or a park can't be built or a sidewalk can't be installed. And it's just part of the constraint we live with. I have no problems with Prop 13. That's a big question. You know, in terms of housing agricultural workers, as I indicated a little earlier this afternoon, we have actually taken steps. We've opened up the ability to build farm worker housing in our agricultural areas. That amounts to eliminating restrictions. It used to be if you're going to build farm support quarters, the folks who occupied them had to work on your parcel. Now it is a wider area, and I think we've seen a little bit of increase in the number of farm support quarters. The wider question of being able to house the next generation, which is the way I think about it, is a regional issue, and it's something that we are working on. In fact, at SLOCOG today, we took action and heard a report on our housing infrastructure plan, which is a regional effort, county in the 7 cities. We commissioned an affordable by design to see what kind of housing is actually at market rate affordable to working families. And that effort is going to, again, it comes back to political will, it comes back to relationships, it comes back to cooperation. Because as we look around the county, we've got to identify the places that those kinds of housing efforts make sense. Those are in the, you know, almost exclusively in the already urbanized area, and a lot of that is a result of having to pay for the infrastructure that is needed to support housing and to provide transportation and all the other things, and to get them close to jobs. I think that if we're clever, if we are creative, if we work cooperatively, if we incentivize development in the right places, again, in the cities, we can make some progress. In the second part of this conversation, I'll talk a little bit about what more specifics the county can do in investing in guaranteed affordable housing for certain income levels.
Well, getting back to what I said earlier, we have built in costs to housing that's not necessary. The $70,000 for a market rate home in terms of building and planning fees is outrageous. These fees are based on hours spent, but maybe we are spending too much effort trying to stop these projects, and we're spending too many man hours to do just that. This cost is unacceptable and is not what you see in other parts of the country. Number two, we do have some limitations on where we have water, but we have places where there is water, and we need to make it easier to build there. I think in incorporated areas, the decisions about building need to be made by the planning and departments in those incorporated areas. But much of the potential building space is in the county, and I would favor making it a little bit easier to build housing. We don't have to have so many of our local builders leaving to go to Fresno or Bakersfield because it's just too difficult to build here. The lack of supply has driven up the cost. The artificial high cost of planning and building has driven up the cost. These are things within our control, and we choose not to solve the problem.
So we've heard Dr. Jones say that on a number of occasions, and he's also heard me lay out the facts in terms of the fees that are part of the county process of approving housing. They are not a significant source of the affordability problem here. I don't know where he gets his $70,000 number, and I'd be interested in an itemized list of that. But the last data I had was that the average fee structure for the county, the average fee for a single family home from the county is about $27,000. And the affordability gap is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000. That's the difference between what a workforce level income can afford and what the median house price actually is in this county. So yeah, it's in there. It's maybe 10% of the problem, but the bigger problem is demand. And the attacking demand is a much more difficult thing because that's a private sector issue. So the county can set the table and zone for the right densities in the right places, and again, affordable by design is a piece of it. The other piece of it is to use public revenues to invest in private sector, nonprofit private sector housing, like People's Self-Help Housing. You drove by their building coming here. They are a tremendous operation. They have been successful. They put together a plan that I was proud to help get through the Coastal Commission for 33 affordable units in Cambria, of all places. It's going to serve our service workers and our ag workers in Cambria. They will be deed restricted as to either rent or purchase according to the income levels. And that's a piece that the county needs to continue to invest in, needs to find revenue streams to feed, because we can leverage tax credits and other sources of funding through groups like People's Self-Help to make a dent in this problem.
There's one thing we might agree on. I think that People's Self-Help Group has really done a good job. When I was on TAG, they had the Rolling Hills project in Templeton. It was well done. During our meeting when we discussed it, it was a public meeting with lots of emails that go out about our projects. There was no public opposition. People were happy to see the project there. It was easily passed by the TAG board. I think there are people that are doing a good job with low-cost housing, but I think the bigger problem is we make it so hard for builders, and we make the hurdle so high that we artificially drive up the cost of market-priced homes. I think one of the key components of an ordinance like that is to have appropriate setbacks. So for instance, in the cannabis applications, there's setback requirements. The simplest of those is 300 feet from the property line. Then there's some other setbacks for schools and sensitive sites. I think that the camping ordinance, the key ingredient in that has to be an appropriate amount of setback so that it in no way impinges neighbors. There are a lot of large parcels of land in our county where you could have these camping sites and not impinge on neighbors. And I would favor authorizing these, but I would also think that great attention needs to be put into an ordinance that has appropriate setbacks so that noise and light and other issues do not impinge on neighboring properties. I'm a firm believer in property rights, but I also believe that neighbors have property rights as well, and we have to deal with that, and I think setbacks is the way you do that.
Setbacks is one tiny piece of a much bigger conversation that has to happen on the rural camping ordinance, as it's called. Right now, the county does have rules for establishing campgrounds in our rural areas. They are cumbersome, they are expensive, but when they were written, we didn't have hip camp. You also referenced Harvest Host, and let me take that one up first, because that one's actually simple. And that one, yesterday, I led the board in finding a very simple way to accommodate that. For those that don't know, Harvest Host is a membership organization organized over the internet that hooks folks with self-contained RVs up with sites like wine tasting rooms and other places in the rural areas so that those RVs can come and park. And the rules for Harvest Host are that you bring a self-contained RV to a site for one night. You're not charged, you're not provided hookups. Whatever interaction you wish to have with the tasting room of the winery is fine. So there was some concern that where these fall in terms of our land use regulation. And I firmly believe that they're simply a form of parking, so that any entity that has a land use permit that includes a parking lot, and that's every wine tasting room in this county and probably most wineries as well, should be able to do that as long as they understand that it's self-contained RV, one night, no charge, no hookups. And our planning department thinks they can get that change made. It's almost a ministerial thing in the de minimis in the background, and we can do it. In the second part of this, I'll get more into the variety of competing interests that have to be considered when we put forward any ordinance. And this rural camping ordinance has quite a number of them that are of serious concern.
Let me make myself clear. I think that having a rural camping availability is a good thing for our county. I think in many ways it's like vacation rentals. You have to think about it in terms of making sure that we don't negatively impact neighboring properties. Certainly, the setbacks I mentioned would be a big part of that. I think that there are probably some spots where you're a little too close to a large amount of urban housing, and you need possibly even greater setbacks for that. That's it.
Yeah, again, Mr. Jones focuses on setbacks, but that's just a small piece. You know, the basis of county land use regulation is what's called the police power of county government as regards these things, which involves protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the community. And that's when we make a decision on a land use project, we have to make the finding that we're doing that. So not negatively impacting neighboring properties, sure, but what are the issues there? The issues are fire safety is the one that I hear the most. People are deeply concerned, especially in Cambria, which sits in the middle of a half-dead pine forest, that certain properties might qualify to have folks come from way out of the area, not understanding the incredible fire danger that they pose if they're not careful. Sanitation is another one. We're not talking about only self-contained RVs here. And so if someone's going to be running a campground in the rural area, what's their septic system? What's their water supply? And these things, it seems, well, you should be able to figure these out. Yeah, we should. But this is going to take a wide conversation among a large number of stakeholders because there are a number of competing interests here. Rural residential interest versus production ag interests of different sorts. And the other thing we find when we introduce new types of land use into particular ag areas is that sometimes they negatively impact agriculture. And, this is a constant fight we have. The residential, the traffic, and the complaints about noise and dust of normal ag operations have impacted agriculture in not so good ways. So this is going to be, I think it's a needed conversation, but it's going to be a big conversation that's going to involve all areas of the county as we decide what to do. Absolutely, a big question. Let me talk about. I referenced up top cost of doing business, and one of the other bad decisions of our board majority was to keep our unincorporated county out of community choice energy, and I'd be interested in Dr. Jones' opinion of that. That has a negative effect on agriculture. You get to choose. Joining community choice energy gets you to choose how much renewable energy you want part of your mix. Well, that's all well and good, but to agriculture, you look at the published rates and the cost of electricity through the community choice provider in our area is 5 to 9% less than going with PG&E. And so the question of why you wouldn't do that just completely astounds me. But there are ideological blinders on some of my fellow supervisors, and they can't bring themselves to support that. As to the reliability, I'm sure we're going to talk about Diablo Canyon, and that's a piece of it that I support. It's extended operation with conditions that take care of San Luis County properly. But we have a lot of other opportunities here. Battery storage, there's a big one going in, proposed for Morro Bay. There are 2 sizable ones proposed down in South County, again, near the transmission lines that they need. Those are going to be really important aspects of bolstering our energy reliability as we take the excess power of renewable energy, particularly solar during the day, store it for use during the evening hours when we need it. Offshore wind is a huge opportunity, and we are on the threshold of that happening. That's a federal issue over which the county government has very little in the way of decision making, but it can be a big contributor to our economy for the jobs, and it's a great contributor to the renewable energy portfolio that is going to be our future in this state.
It is correct we need to talk about Diablo Canyon. It produces about 9% of all the electricity in our state. It's an important employer in our county. It is a source of power that works when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. It's a baseload facility, meaning during those times when other things are not working, when the wind's not blowing, you still have electricity. We need it to prevent brownouts and blackouts. Also, if you are enough of a geek, you probably saw the MIT Stanford studies They recommended that it stay open because their thoughts were when the wind was blowing, the sun was shining, we could use that excess power to desal water at a cost of less than $1 per cubic meter, or a little less than $1,000 per acre foot. I think that our strategy needs to include Diablo Canyon. I applaud our state legislature and our governor for passing legislation and signing legislation to do just that. Mr. Gibson isn't exactly telling you his whole story. It turns out that earlier this year, when our board wanted to send a letter to our governor encouraging his help on trying to keep Diablo Canyon open, he was the only supervisor who voted against sending that letter. Now to turn around and say that he's in favor of Diablo Canyon is an interesting turn of events. I do like the idea of having wind and solar as well. I'm a little nervous about our battery storage because of potential fire in battery storage facilities. Maybe the location should be in a place that's fire safe, not adjacent to highly developed areas.
It's pretty clear that Mr. Jones didn't read the letter that was actually sent by the Board of Supervisors, because what it said was to the governor, if PG&E applies for extension of Diablo Canyon, which it had not yet, Governor Newsom, please give them everything they want in terms of expediting their permit. And what was missing there were two things. One of them is that PG&E wasn't asking to extend Diablo Canyon, but the second was it spoke not at all to what needed to be done to protect San Luis Obispo County's interests. The first and foremost one is the safety aspects of operating a nuclear power plant. We've lived with it for over 40 years, or around 40 years right now. And we know about the seismic risk, but there's also deferred maintenance within that plant and the need for seismic upgrades. The emergency response out there, professionals have indicated, you may have seen their op-ed in the Tribune, that needs to be improved. And then there's spent fuel. So I'm fine with Diablo Canyon continuing to operate. Mr. Jones has falsely misrepresented that I have voted to close it down. I've never done that. But we need first and foremost to make sure that our interests in this county are taken care of. And they extend beyond the safety. They extend to our economic future. Diablo Canyon is in its transition over however many years, I don't know, to decommissioning, but our future is a very different economic one than Diablo Canyon. We got economic development money that we should not have to pay back, and it looks like we will not. We also have significant conservation opportunity in the 12,000 acres of land and the 14 miles of coastline that surround the plant. That's going to be an amazing improvement and addition to our already conserved natural areas that are central to our visitor-serving economy.
I'll reiterate that Diablo Canyon, when we get to the point where we need less electricity from that, can be used for desal at a price that works at least for residential use. If we could reduce the residential demand, we'd have more water for agriculture, we'd have more water for other issues. This is not small change. An industrial scale desal plant that could operate almost 24 hours a day eventually, but now when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, we need it for electrical generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burchett. Thanks to the Farm Bureau again. Thanks to you all for coming out. This forum has shown our differences in the knowledge of county government, our understanding of county government, the understanding of what relationships are necessary to take care of the issues that stand before us. You deserve county government that you can be proud of. And our board majority with which Dr. Jones is aligned has failed this county in many ways. I'm looking forward with a change in that majority coming next year to lead this county forward. Things are tough right now, but we have opportunities out there. We have opportunities for our economic future. We have opportunities to take care of social issues like homelessness and the cost of housing, and I look forward. I'm proud to be endorsed by over 40 elected, former and current elected officials, and over 850 individuals. I am passionate about making sure that local government, the most important layer of government, works for everyone in this county, and I thank you.
I want to thank you. I want to thank the Farm Bureau for tonight's event. 3 generations of my family now live in District 2. I care greatly about this wonderful place we all live in, and I want to protect it for future generations. As a surgeon, I worked 60 hours a week, and I am willing to work just as hard representing you. My door will be open. I want to hear from you. I will be that anti-corruption, honest supervisor you deserve. I am Dr. Bruce Jones, the best Bruce for District 2.